What does it take for a nation to look in the mirror and decide to completely reinvent itself? Well, today, we're going to dive into one of history's most incredible stories of social change, the Great Reform Movements of 19th century India.
I mean, that's a huge question, right? But for 19th century India, it was the only question that mattered. This wasn't just about politics or fighting for power. This was a struggle for the very soul of a society. So, how did it all go down?
To get why this change was so desperately needed, you have to understand the situation, which the source material calls a vicious web. And that's the perfect description. This wasn't just a society that was stuck, it was tangled up in social and religious customs that were causing immense suffering, all under the weight of superstition and really rigid traditions.
So, to really grasp the scale of the challenge here, we need to get specific. Let's break down the two biggest hurdles that the reformers were up against.
First up, the position of women. And honestly, to call it depressing is a massive understatement. We're talking about a society where female infanticide was a real issue, where young girls were routinely forced into child marriages, and where the horrifying practice of Sati, widows being burned alive on their husband's funeral pyre, actually happened. The great reformer Raja Ram Mohan Roy called it what it was: murder according to every Shastra. And for the widows who managed to escape that fate, a life of total misery and humiliation was often all they had to look forward to.
And then you have the second major issue, the debilitating caste system. Now, this wasn't just about social classes. It was this incredibly rigid, hierarchical system that basically dictated your entire life from the moment you were born. And at the very bottom were the untouchables, who faced just unbelievable restrictions and daily humiliation. The whole system just crushed individual ambition, it made national unity pretty much impossible, and at its heart, it was a profound violation of human dignity.
So, you've got this environment with these deep-seated social problems. Where on earth does the spark for change even come from? What could possibly shake foundations that have been in place for centuries?
Well, for centuries, invaders who came to India usually ended up being absorbed into its culture, but the British conquest was totally different. They stayed separate and they brought with them a whole new set of ideas from Europe, things like science, rationalism, and humanism. So this wasn't just a military takeover, it was a head-on ideological challenge.
And this collision of two worlds, it sparked something really profound, a new awareness. A new generation of educated Indians started looking at their own society with fresh eyes. They started to realize that the weaknesses that allowed a small group of foreigners to colonize their vast nation weren't external. They were internal. They were rooted right there in their own social fabric.
And this new way of thinking was guided by a really powerful set of tools. So instead of just blindly accepting tradition, these reformers began asking some tough new questions. Through the lens of rationalism, they asked, does this tradition make any logical sense? Does it actually help society? Through religious universalism, they tried to look past all the rituals to find the common truths that all faiths share. And with humanism, they shifted the focus to the well-being and dignity of individual people, right here on Earth, not in some faraway afterlife.
Okay, so armed with this new mindset, the reformers went straight for the most glaring injustices, and that fight started with the rights and dignity of women.
And this timeline really shows you this was not an overnight victory. It was a long, grueling battle fought over decades. In 1829, after intense campaigning by people like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, the government finally banned Sati. That's a huge step. But then you have to wait until 1856 for the efforts of Ishwar Chandra and Yasagar to finally legalize widow remarriage. It took until 1891 just to raise the marriage age for girls to 12, and all the way to 1929 to get it to 14. Every single step was a hard-fought victory. And you know, sometimes the biggest changes come down to the incredible courage of just one person. This is Rukmabai Raut. She was married off when she was only 11. Years later, when her husband demanded she come live with him, she refused. She famously said she would rather face punishment than be forced into a marriage she never agreed to. Her case became a national sensation, and it forced the entire country to confront the issues of child marriage and a woman's consent.
At the heart of this whole fight was an idea that at the time was totally radical: educating women.
Pioneers like J.E.D. Bethune in Calcutta, and especially Jyotiba and Savitribai Phule in Pune, faced incredible opposition just to open the very first schools for girls. In fact, Savitribai Phule was quite possibly the first female teacher in all of modern India. And these early efforts paved the way for huge milestones, like the first Indian women's university founded by Professor D.K. Karve.
So, at the exact same time as this incredible fight for women's rights is gaining steam, another, equally massive struggle was being waged: the fight to dismantle the caste system.
This quote from Dr. B.R. Ambedkar just hits the nail on the head. He's saying that the system was so perfectly designed to keep the upper castes in power that any rational critic from inside it, a Voltaire, would be seen as a threat to the entire structure. The battle had to be an intellectual one, not just a social one.
And Ambedkar didn't just diagnose the problem. He gave people a playbook. In 1924, he founded an organization with this incredibly clear, powerful motto: educate, agitate, and organize. This wasn't just a nice-sounding phrase. It was a direct call to action. Educate yourselves so you understand your rights, agitate to demand those rights, and organize to build the collective power to make it happen. And this philosophy was put into action in the most dramatic way in 1927. Dr. Ambedkar led thousands of untouchables to the public water tank in Mahad, which of course they were forbidden to use. He then walked up and publicly drank from it. It was such a simple but revolutionary act of defiance. And later, they burned the Manusmriti, a traditional text that was used to justify inequality, symbolically rejecting the whole religious basis for the caste system.
And at this point, you know this wasn't some fringe movement anymore. The struggle had reached the absolute center of the national conversation. Even mainstream leaders like M.K. Gandhi now saw the fight against untouchability as a fight for the very soul of India. As he put it so powerfully, if untouchability lives, India perishes. It was seen as an existential threat that simply had to be destroyed.
And this is so critical to understand. These weren't just a bunch of isolated struggles. Together, all of these 19th century battles were laying the actual foundation upon which a new, modern India was going to be built.
You can literally draw a straight line from the goals of these reformers to the guiding principles of independent India. The Constitution of India took their ideals and wrote them into law. Untouchability was officially abolished. It forbade any kind of discrimination at public places like wells and tanks, a direct echo of that Mahad Satyagraha. It guaranteed justice, equality, and non-discrimination for every single citizen. The legacy of these reformers is written right into the DNA of the Republic.
Which leaves us with one last, pretty powerful question to think about. These reformers, they won monumental victories. But the war of ideas, that never really ends, does it? So when you look at our world today, which of these 19th century battles for equality, for dignity, and for justice are we still fighting?